Well, hello there, friends. Pull up a chair and sit a spell. Have you noticed how the evening air has begun to change? There is a quiet, crisp whisper moving through it now. Around the neighborhood, people are already pulling up their garden stakes, stuffing old cucumber vines into bags, and sweeping their empty beds clean. They think the season is finished. They believe September is the time to close the book on this year's harvest, blow out the lantern, and wait for the spring seed catalogs to arrive. But you and I know something they don't. Let me tell you about a man named Walter Boyd. Back in the winter of 1934, deep in Owsley County, Kentucky, the Great Depression was weighing heavily on families. Grocery shelves were nearly bare, and pockets were even emptier. Yet during August and September, Walter Boyd walked into his fields wearing a simple canvas apron filled with seeds. He had no supermarket nearby. He had no fancy greenhouse, and he certainly didn't own a pesticide sprayer. What Walter had was half an acre of soil, a milk cow, and an old understanding of the land that had been handed down through generations. From that half acre, Walter Boyd managed to feed 9 hungry people through a bitter Kentucky winter. He didn't depend on cans of soup or plastic bags of wilted greens from a store. And do you know when his most important garden was planted? It wasn't the spring garden, friends. It was the garden he planted in late summer and early autumn. Cabbage, turnips, beets, carrots, and winter rye all went into the ground as the days became shorter and the nights started cooling down. Today, if the supermarket suddenly closed on a Monday, plenty of our neighbors wouldn't know how to put a full week of meals on the table. Somewhere along the way, we traded self-reliance for convenience, and a beautiful, life-saving inheritance began slipping through our fingers. But it doesn't have to stay that way. The ground beneath your feet is still every bit as capable of producing food as the soil Walter Boyd once walked across. September is not the end of the garden. It is a hinge between seasons. It is the moment when the garden begins shifting away from what summer heat can grow and toward what autumn cold can sweeten. And that brings us to one of the most remarkable pieces of plant biology that many people have forgotten. When a cool season leafy vegetable or root crop begins feeling colder nights, especially when a light frost settles over the ground, the plant senses danger. It knows that if the water inside its cells freezes, expanding ice crystals can rupture those cells from within and kill the plant. So the plant does something remarkably clever. It reaches into the starch reserves it has stored, breaks those starches down, and converts them into simple soluble sugars, especially glucose and fructose. Those sugars move into the plant's cells. Because water containing sugar freezes at a lower temperature than plain water, those sugars act like a natural biological antifreeze. The plant isn't trying to become more delicious for you. It is simply trying to survive the cold night. But when you walk outside in November and pull a carrot from the soil or harvest a leaf of kale, you are tasting the result of that survival response. And let me tell you, friends, it can produce some of the sweetest, crispest, most satisfying food you'll ever pull from a garden. So why are you still paying $4 for a plastic bag of pre-washed salad greens, leaves harvested long ago, hauled across several states, and destined to turn into green slime in your refrigerator by next Tuesday? Why buy bland, waxy roots when the dirt in your own backyard is waiting to give you a sweet, frost-kissed harvest? Today, we're going through 18 vegetables you should plant in September, and you need to get moving. Do it now while the soil is still warm and ready, because in this garden, the coming cold isn't your enemy. It's your secret ingredient. Let's get our hands dirty. 1. Kale. Let's begin with the king of winter resilience, kale. If one vegetable represents the victory of the autumn garden over the heat of summer, this is it. During hot summer weather, kale can grow slowly and often becomes tough, fibrous, and noticeably bitter beneath the scorching sun. But once September arrives and nighttime temperatures begin falling, something changes inside the plant. Kale begins undergoing a biochemical transformation. As temperatures drop below freezing, the plant quickly converts stored starches into soluble sugars. That means a kale leaf harvested in November after several hard frosts can taste completely different from one picked in July. Instead of being tough and bitter, Those cold weather leaves become tender, mild, and wonderfully sweet. If you want that kind of harvest, sow your kale seeds now, roughly a quarter to half an inch deep. As the seedlings grow, thin them until they stand around 6 to 12 inches apart, so each plant has enough space. A few of my favorite varieties are winter boar for exceptional cold toughness, red Russian for its tender leaves and beautiful purple veins, and lacinato, also known as dinosaur kale, for its dark color and rich, earthy texture. And when harvest time comes, don't pull the entire plant out of the ground. Instead, remove the mature outer leaves from the bottom while leaving the young central growing point untouched. As long as that center remains, the plant will continue producing new leaves through the winter, sometimes even beneath a blanket of snow. Why keep buying bags of greens when one good row of kale can help feed your family from October all the way through February? 2. Spinach. Next comes spinach, and especially that legendary variety called Bloomsdale Long-Standing, an open-pollinated heirloom that has been feeding families since 1826. Spinach is a powerhouse in the cool season garden, but even experienced gardeners sometimes struggle with it because of a biological mechanism known as thermodormancy. Spinach seeds are remarkably sensitive to temperature. When you try sowing them while the soil is hotter than about 75 or 80 degrees Fahrenheit, those seeds may simply refuse to germinate. They sit there waiting for cooler conditions, while you stand over the bed wondering whether the seed company sold you a bad packet. Here's one of my favorite old-fashioned tricks for dealing with that lingering September heat. Take your spinach seeds and wrap them in a damp paper towel. Seal the towel inside a small plastic bag, then place the bag in your refrigerator for about 48 hours before planting. That cold treatment tricks the seeds into behaving as though winter has already passed, helping reset their dormancy response. Afterward, sow them about half an inch deep. You may soon see a thick, even row of young spinach seedlings appearing. Spinach has shallow roots, so during those first few weeks, keep the soil consistently moist. Once the plants become established, they're surprisingly durable. They can survive temperatures well below freezing, overwinter beneath a light covering of straw mulch, and then reward you with fresh, sweet leaves the following March before the first daffodils have even broken through the ground. 3. Carrots. There is one rule on the homestead that I consider non-negotiable when it comes to carrots. Direct seed them. Never try transplanting carrot seedlings. The moment you move one of those tiny seedlings, you risk damaging its main taproot. And once that taproot is disturbed, you may end up harvesting twisted, forked, deformed carrots that are frustrating to peel. For a September planting, sow carrot seed very shallowly, around 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch deep, in soil that has been loosened deeply and cleared of stones. Carrots require steady moisture to germinate, and those seeds can take as long as 2 weeks to emerge. The problem is that September afternoons can still be warm. The upper quarter inch of your seed bed may dry out and form a crust in only a few hours, killing a seed just as it begins to sprout. Here is Old Frank's dependable solution. After sowing your carrots, lay a piece of damp burlap or a wooden board flat over the row. That cover helps trap moisture near the soil surface, while also keeping the seed bed cooler. Every morning, lift the cover and take a look underneath. The moment you see those tiny green needles beginning to break through, remove the cover immediately so the seedlings can reach the sunlight. For heavier clay soil, consider shorter and stockier varieties, such as Danvers 126 or Nantes. They can work their way through dense ground better than some of the longer, more delicate carrot types. And once frost begins arriving, don't rush to dig them all. Leave those roots in the ground beneath a layer of straw. The cold will work on them, turning those carrots sweeter than any apple you've tasted. 4. Radishes. If you're looking for quick gratification from your September garden, radishes are hard to beat. Fast varieties such as Cherry Belle and French Breakfast can travel from seed to table in only about 20 to 25 days. They're so quick that you can even use them as living row markers. Sow radish seeds alongside slow germinating carrots. The radishes will emerge first, help break the soil crust, clearly show you where the row is and usually be harvested before the carrots need that space. But there is another kind of radish that many gardeners overlook: winter radishes. Large varieties, such as the white daikon or thick, dark-skinned black Spanish round, can be planted in September to develop deep, dense roots. They generally mature in around 50 to 70 days, bringing their harvest right into the colder part of autumn. The key to producing a good radish is steady, consistent moisture. If the plants become dry during a warm spell and are suddenly hit by a heavy soaking rain, the roots may take up water too quickly, swell rapidly, and split open. Keep the soil evenly moist. Harvest your radishes while they're still young and tender, and enjoy that crisp, peppery crunch made a little sweeter by the cool autumn air. 5. Beets. Now let's talk about beets, especially the historic Detroit dark red and the beautiful candy-striped Chioggia. Beets are one of those wonderful two-for-one crops that gardeners often underestimate. While the root is slowly developing beneath the soil, you can begin harvesting young, tender beet greens from above. Those leaves taste much like mild Swiss chard and are full of nutrition. But before sowing beets, there is one botanical detail you need to understand. What looks like one beet seed usually isn't a single seed at all. It is actually a rough little cluster, a dry pod containing 2 to 4 individual seeds fused together. That is why several seedlings often emerge from what appears to be one seed. Left crowded together, those plants compete with one another and may produce undersized, woody roots. One way to help is to soak your beet seeds in warm water for about 24 hours before planting. This softens the pod and helps dissolve the natural germination inhibitors around the seed coat. Then sow them about ½ an inch deep. Once the seedlings emerge, thin them until the remaining plants stand roughly 3 to 4 inches apart. And don't throw those thinnings away. Wash them off and toss them straight into your salad bowl. 6. Lettuce. One of the great frustrations of growing lettuce in spring is that you're always racing against the clock. As spring days become longer and temperatures rise, the plant receives a biological signal telling it to bolt. Suddenly, that beautiful lettuce sends up a flower stalk, turns intensely bitter, and becomes nearly impossible to enjoy. Fall lettuce lives under a completely different set of conditions. As daylight becomes shorter and the nights grow cooler, that bolting signal doesn't arrive in the same way. Instead, the plants grow more slowly, developing tender, sweet heads that can sit patiently in the garden while you decide when to harvest them. The main September challenge is getting lettuce seed to germinate, while some of that late summer heat still lingers. Like spinach, lettuce can enter thermodormancy when soil temperatures climb above about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. A simple solution is to stretch 30% to 40% shade cloth over wire or PVC hoops, roughly 18 inches above your seedbed. That shade can greatly reduce radiant heat at the soil surface, helping keep the seedbed cooler and more consistently damp. Varieties such as salad bowl, oak leaf, and winter density can be sown directly on the surface or covered only very lightly because the seeds need some light for germination. Mist the seedbed gently twice a day, and you can keep fresh salad greens coming well into the colder months. 7. Turnips. Let's talk about a vegetable that has been unfairly pushed aside on the American dinner plate over the last 50 years. The humble turnip. After World War II, as large agricultural companies promoted canned soups and frozen television dinners, many families began feeling embarrassed about foods connected with the old-fashioned root cellar. Turnips slowly became associated with poverty, livestock feed, and difficult times. But friends, something wonderful was lost along the way. A turnip harvested during the middle of summer can have a strong, sharp, sulfur-like bite that isn't easy for everyone to love. But take that same crop, planted in September, and harvested after several light November frosts, and you get something entirely different. Sweet, crisp, mild. If your family believes they don't like turnips, try the Japanese salad turnip known as hakare. These small white globes grow quickly, usually maturing in only about 30 to 40 days, and they can be sweet enough to pull straight from the soil and eat raw like an apple. For winter storage, The classic purple top white globe is another excellent choice. Direct sow the seeds about half an inch deep and thin the seedlings until they're roughly 4 inches apart. When you harvest roots for storage, cut the leafy tops off completely before placing the turnips into damp sand. If you leave those greens attached, they continue pulling moisture from the root, eventually leaving you with shriveled, woody turnips. Remove the tops, keep the roots cool, and those turnips can help feed you throughout the winter. 8. Broccoli. Many gardeners plant broccoli in spring only to watch it produce a small, loose head that quickly explodes into yellow flowers when June heat arrives. After that experience, they decide broccoli must simply be too difficult for the home garden. But the real problem is often timing. Broccoli doesn't dislike the gardener. It dislikes summer heat. If you want those tight, sweet heads that look like something from a market stand, broccoli needs to reach maturity in the cool, crisp conditions of October and November. If you didn't start your own seedlings indoors last month, visit a local nursery and look for strong, healthy transplants. Set them into soil enriched with plenty of organic compost and give each plant around 18 to 24 inches of space. Broccoli is a heavy feeder, so once those transplants are established, side dress them with a little organic fertilizer. When the main head is finally ready, cut it at an angle. That angled cut helps keep rainwater from collecting in the hollow stem and causing rot. And whatever you do, don't pull the plant after harvesting that central head. Leave it in place. The plant can continue sending out tender side shoots for weeks, giving you repeated harvests of what amounts to baby broccoli, until a hard freeze finally ends the season. 9. Cabbage. Cabbage is one of the great survival foods of the old homestead. A firm, healthy cabbage harvested in late autumn can remain crisp and nutritious for months when stored in a cool cellar or refrigerator. But if you want to grow a tight head without watching it split open just before harvest, you need to pay close attention to water. Much like radishes, cabbage can suffer when moisture arrives unevenly. If a plant goes through a dry period and then suddenly receives a heavy soaking, the inner leaves may expand faster than the outer leaves can stretch. The result? That beautiful cabbage splits right down the middle. Now, imagine you've got a nearly perfect head waiting in the garden, and the forecast says a heavy rainstorm is coming. You've got two choices. The first is simple: harvest the cabbage immediately. The second is one of my favorite old grandfather tricks. Grab the plant firmly at the base of the stem and give the whole cabbage a strong half-turn twist in the soil. That twisting motion breaks some of the shallow feeder roots, slowing the amount of water the plant can absorb. It can buy you another week or two in the garden without the same danger of that head suddenly splitting. 10. Cauliflower. Cauliflower is another member of the brassica family that loves cool autumn weather. But if you want those heads to remain white, sweet, and beautiful, there is one traditional technique you need to know. It's called blanching. When a developing cauliflower curd is exposed directly to strong, hot sunlight, it can begin turning yellowish-brown and develop a stronger, less pleasant flavor. The solution is wonderfully simple. Once the central curd reaches roughly the size of a golf ball, gather the plant's broad outer leaves and pull them upward over the developing head. Cover the curd completely, then hold those leaves together at the top with a soft rubber band or a piece of twine. You have now created a little shaded microclimate inside the plant itself. That protective cover helps the cauliflower stay crisp, sweet, and snow white. Space the plants roughly 18 inches apart, keep the soil consistently moist, and watch for late summer pests such as cabbage loopers. There are few garden surprises more satisfying than opening those tied leaves in late October and finding a clean, perfect head of white cauliflower waiting underneath. 11. Swiss chard. If you want a crop that can carry your garden from one season into the next, Swiss chard deserves a place in your beds. Chard is one of the toughest, most persistent leafy vegetables you can grow. It doesn't rush to bolt in summer heat the way spinach does, and when autumn frost arrives, chard can be surprisingly reluctant to disappear. A single row planted in September can provide leaves throughout the autumn. I've had winters when brutal freezing weather destroyed every bit of foliage above the soil, What remained looked like nothing more than dead, frozen mush. I assumed the bed was finished. Then April arrived. Before I had even put my garden spade into the soil, those deep, stubborn roots pushed fresh green growth right back out of the ground. To grow Swiss chard, sow the seeds around half an inch deep and thin the seedlings until they're roughly 6 inches apart. When harvest begins, remember the old cut and come again rule. Take the mature outer leaves first, cutting them down near the base, and leave the central growing crown alone. Do that, and the plant can keep producing another flush of fresh leaves every couple of weeks. And keep an eye out for leaf miners. If you notice a small, winding white trail running through a leaf, pinch that leaf off and burn it so the pest doesn't continue spreading. 12. Garden peas. Planting garden peas in September feels completely backward to many people because peas are so strongly associated with early spring. But autumn peas can be a revelation. When pea vines reach maturity in cooling fall weather, the pods can become noticeably sweeter and crisper than those grown in warmer conditions. And there is one scientific fact about peas that helps explain why growing your own is so rewarding. The moment a pea is harvested, the sugars inside it begin converting back into starch. Within only a few hours, some of that remarkable sweetness already begins to fade. That is why supermarket peas can taste bland and starchy after spending days moving through trucks, warehouses, and store shelves. Grow them yourself, and the experience is completely different. You can step outside, walk over to your trellis, pick a handful of crisp snap peas, and eat them right there, while their flavor is still at its absolute peak. Sow pea seeds directly about an inch deep, and install your trellis or netting immediately. Don't wait until the vines are already tall. Pea vines are fragile, and their roots are sensitive. Trying to push supports into the soil after the plants are established can easily damage those roots and slow the plants down. Give them something to climb from the beginning, and let them do what peas were built to do. 13. Bush snap beans. Bush snap beans are different from most of the vegetables we're talking about today because they come with a very real ticking clock. Kale and cabbage can tolerate plenty of cold. Bush beans cannot. They are extremely sensitive to frost, and a single night around 30 degrees Fahrenheit can kill the plants outright. So before putting these seeds into September soil, you're going to need to do a little garden math. Find your average local first frost date. Then choose a quick maturing variety such as Provider or Contender, which can mature in roughly 50 days. You also want at least another week of breathing room before that expected frost arrives. Once you know you've got enough time, sow the beans directly about an inch deep and approximately 3 inches apart. Bush beans don't require thinning. And here's one of my favorite tricks for keeping the harvest coming. Pick them every day. Once those plants begin producing pods, walk down the row daily and harvest what is ready. If you leave several beans on the plant until they fully mature and begin drying, the plant receives a biological message that its reproductive job has been completed. Flowering slows down, and production starts tapering off. But when you continue removing the young beans, day after day, the plant behaves as though its job isn't finished yet. It keeps flowering. And it keeps giving you fresh beans for weeks. 14. Kohlrabi. Kohlrabi is one of those vegetables that looks as though it arrived from another planet. That round structure sitting above the soil isn't a root. It's a swollen stem, with leaves extending from every direction like some little green satellite. Because it looks so unusual, many supermarket shoppers walk straight past it, assuming anything that strange must be difficult to grow or even harder to cook. But around the homestead, kohlrabi is a treasure. It grows quickly, reaching maturity in roughly 45 to 60 days, and the flesh is crisp and juicy, with a mild sweetness somewhere between a turnip and a broccoli stem. Sow the seeds directly around a 1/4 inch deep, or plant transplants with about 4 to 6 inches between them. Kohlrabi loves the cool air of autumn, and those temperatures help keep its swollen stem tender and sweet. But you need to remember one important harvest rule. Don't let it become too large. Harvest kohlrabi while the bulb is still around 2 to 3 inches across. Leave it standing too long, and the outer skin begins turning woody, while the interior grows tough and fibrous. that delicate texture disappears. Pick it at the right size, slice it thin, add a little olive oil and salt, and you've got a crisp, satisfying treat straight from the garden. 15. Collard greens. Collard greens are one of the great backbones of the southern homestead. They represent warmth, endurance, and survival. For more than a century and a half, open-pollinated varieties, such as Georgia Southern and Morris Heading, helped feed sharecroppers, tenant farmers, and mountain families through winters that would have tested anyone. Plant a single 10-foot row of collards in September, and those plants can give you pounds of nutritious greens from autumn through Christmas and, in many cases, beyond Valentine's Day. Collards are remarkably tough. They can survive temperatures down around 20 degrees Fahrenheit without protection. And just like kale, their flavor changes after heavy frost. The cold reduces bitterness and brings forward a deeper, richer sweetness. Plant seeds, or transplants, around 12 to 18 inches apart. When harvest time arrives, simply snap off the large, mature leaves from the bottom of the plant. Leave the growing center alone. The central stalk will continue getting taller until it begins looking like a little palm tree, constantly producing fresh leaves from the top throughout the winter. Don't trade that old heritage for another plastic bag of bland store-bought salad. 16. Scallions. Scallions, also known as bunching onions, are among the toughest and most productive crops you can grow in a home garden. They tolerate cold extremely well, and mature plants can survive a solid hard freeze without much trouble. But here's one of Old Frank's favorite ways to make a single planting keep working for you. I call it the regenerative scallion technique. When you're ready to harvest your green onions, don't yank the entire plant from the ground. Leave those roots where they are. Take a sharp pair of scissors and cut the green stalks roughly an inch above the soil, keeping the white base and root system completely undisturbed. Then give it a little time. Within around 10 to 14 days, those same roots can push out a fresh set of green shoots, giving you another harvest ready for the kitchen. You can repeat this 3 or 4 times throughout the autumn. Scallions can be started from seed, from small onion sets, or even from the leftover white root bases of green onions you bought at the grocery store. So why keep buying plastic sleeves of green onions when one row in your own garden can keep sending up fresh green flavor again and again? 17. Arugula. If you're looking for a leafy green that adds a little gourmet character to the autumn table, arugula belongs in your September garden. It's incredibly quick, usually maturing in only 30 to 35 days, and it handles frost remarkably well. But arugula grown in summer can be a very different vegetable. Under hot summer sun, its flavor often becomes aggressively spicy, bitter, and so strong that some leaves are almost painful to eat. Grow that same plant in the cool air of autumn, and the experience changes. Cold weather softens that harsh bite. What's left is a more delicate, nutty, pleasantly peppery green that can transform a simple salad or sandwich. Sow arugula seed directly on the soil surface or cover it only lightly, because the seed needs a little light to germinate. Keep rows approximately 12 inches apart and maintain consistent moisture so the young plants don't become stressed. For especially tender leaves, begin harvesting them as baby greens once they reach around 3 to 4 inches tall. Take the outer leaves first and leave the center growing. The plant will continue giving you fresh salad leaves for weeks. 18. Fall potatoes. And finally, we come to fall potatoes. Most people think of potatoes strictly as a spring crop, but growing a second round in autumn can be a wonderful way to fill the cellar with fresh, flavorful tubers. Because those potatoes begin forming as soil temperatures cool during October, an autumn crop can develop a sweeter, richer flavor than potatoes harvested from a spring planting. The key to success with September potatoes is simple. Plant deep and mulch heavily. Start by digging deep furrows. Place your seed potatoes at the bottom with healthy sprouting eyes, then cover them with roughly 2 inches of soil. After that, immediately cover the entire row with 4 to 6 inches of clean, loose straw or hay. That thick layer is critical. It protects the ground from the hot September sun, can lower soil temperature by 10 to 15 degrees, and helps hold precious moisture around the developing roots. Let those potato plants continue growing until roughly 2/3 of the foliage has naturally yellowed and died back in late autumn. Once you dig the potatoes, do not wash them. Move them directly into a dark, airy, humid location and leave them there for around 2 weeks so they can go through a process known as curing. During curing, the potato skin thickens and begins to cork over. That tougher skin helps protect the tuber from rot and can extend storage life for as long as 6 months. Yukon Gold, Kennebec, and Red Norland are all excellent choices for this autumn growing cycle. So there you have it, friends. 18 vegetables waiting for you to put them into the ground this September. Now before I go, let me be straight with you. This isn't doomer talk, and it isn't prepper talk. I'm not trying to frighten you, and I'm certainly not telling you the world is going to end next Tuesday. What I am telling you is that your grocery bill is real. The inflation you're seeing at the supermarket is real. And most important of all, the dirt underneath your feet is real. That soil is ready to work with you if you're willing to meet it halfway. You don't need to rush outside tomorrow morning and try planting all 18 of these crops. If you attempt that, you'll wear yourself out, your back will hurt, and I'll have failed you as a friend. So this week, I want you to choose one. Just one. Go to your feed store and buy a $2 packet of Detroit dark red beet seeds, then sow one simple 10-foot row. Or find a neighbor with a clump of chives, separate a small division, and plant it near your kitchen door. Or pick up a $3 bag of winter rye seed, scatter it over one of those empty beds left behind by your summer garden, and watch it grow into a thick green carpet that will help feed next year's soil for free. If you do just one of those things by Sunday night, you will have taken a bigger step toward reclaiming your self-reliance than most people will take all autumn. Walter Boyd fed 9 people through a Great Depression winter, using half an acre of soil and 1 milk cow. He didn't have anything you don't have right now. He simply understood what September was for, and now you understand it too. Your grandfather grew these crops, friend. Somewhere along the way, someone simply didn't get the chance to pass that knowledge down to you. But now it's yours again. Don't let it disappear with you. Next time, we're going to explore the forgotten winter storage methods our grandparents used to keep root crops fresh from October all the way until Easter, with no jars, no freezer, and no electricity required. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. Not for me, but so together we can keep bringing this old, beautiful, self-reliant way of life back to our homesteads, one row and one seed at a time. Keep the old ways, friends. They kept us. Until next time, this is Old Farmer Frank signing off. Happy planting.